Well, first of all, I just want to introduce you, if you're not here with JNCL-NCLIS, of who we really are. And so JNCL stands for the Joint National Committee for Languages. The NCLIS portion is the National Council for Languages and International Studies. So together, these two organizations became one, and the goal here is really to advocate for language education. So you'll see that we are a group that is uniting a number of leading organizations of which you are all likely a member. Potentially you are a member of more than one of the organizations that JNCL represents. And together we work to provide information to our legislators as well as to those stakeholders and language professionals out in the field, but also to advocate for policy changes at the federal level that impact us both in the classroom as well as our students themselves. And we have a great 40-year history. You'll hear a little bit more about that in a short video that we're going to be sharing with you. But the goal or the mission of JNCL is to really ensure that every American has the opportunity to learn English and at least one other language. And this upcoming Language Advocacy Days, we're really talking multilingualism. So maybe we want to say more than one other language. Hopefully our students will get excited and continue their language journey with other additional languages. So you'll see here in the bulletin box a number of different areas in which JNCL is advocating. So obviously our sort of the core that many of you represent are K-12 world language education programs. But we also represent and include in our membership, organizational membership, organizations that work with English language learners, dual language immersion, early language education, our higher ed education programs, international studies, studies abroad. Certainly we provide professional learning and ongoing learning. JNCL is more than just Language Advocacy Days. We have a number of other programs and informational tools and resources that are available to you throughout the year. An exciting group that I have enjoyed working with are our community-based heritage language programs. Excuse me, these are programs that aren't in traditional schools on the weekends. And lastly, certainly the translation and interpretation industry, as well as others who are working in the language field. So with that, I'd like to share with you a video that comes from our 40th anniversary of language advocacy and with JNCL. And so if I guess Alyssa, if you could press the button here.
In 1978, in order to address our nation's lack of language proficient Americans, President Jimmy Carter convened the Commission on Foreign Language and International Studies. The Commission's charge was to review the existing legislation, assess national need, and recommend, quote, means for directing public attention to the importance of foreign language and international studies for the improvement of communications and understanding with other nations in an increasingly interdependent world. It was the vision and clear national concern expressed by members of the Commission, in particular, then Congressman Paul Simon and Congressman Leon Panetta, that led to the Commission's report defining the need for a leading body to continue to advocate for and support the growth of language learning with results for all Americans. One of the Commission's major recommendations was the creation of a Washington presence. In 1981, that presence began to be established, and the idea of the Joint National Committee for Languages and its sister association, the National Council for Languages and International Studies, was born as an educational association originally comprised of 8 members, giving life to this national need for grassroots educational advocacy and lobbying for language, and setting the stage for the development of this great collaborative organization.
Dean Elatus, as he's known due to his long tenure as Dean of Georgetown School of Languages and Linguistics, was instrumental in founding JNCL-NCLIS. I am Dr. Nicole Cooper, and I'm an Associate Clinical Professor of Management at the University of Maryland. I interviewed Dean Latis as part of my dissertation, which was an oral history of his life. Some have called Dean Latis the Great One. Others called him Dean East, since he was a huge force in foreign language education and policy on the East Coast. However, despite these monikers, I found Dean Latis to actually be quite humble. It was difficult throughout our numerous interviews to get him to really take credit for these accomplishments that he'd done, running TESOL, passing the NDAA, founding JNCL. And one of his strengths was really in identifying talent. Whether it was Dr. Deborah Tannen at Georgetown's School of Languages and Linguistics, or Dr. J. David Edwards at JNCL, he had a nose for finding great people. Speaking about JNCL, Dean Latis said, "This had a funny beginning. The Presidential Commission on Foreign Languages and International Studies was headed by then President of Cornell University. It was the Perkins Commission. It came out and I saw what was happening. I'd been in the government and I saw what happened to those reports. And at a meeting for the Joint National Committee of Languages in Tucson, I said, look, you guys, what's going to happen to this? It's going to die. We ought to have our own lobby group. And so, to thank me for my suggestion, they made me chairman of the committee to find somebody. And we found a couple of people, but then I found that gem in the backyard named Dave Edwards."
Since 1981, JNCL-NCLIS has continued to grow as a coalition that encompasses all aspects of language learning in the United States, all levels of education, language services, and language learning companies. The strength of the common consistent voice used by JNCL-NCLIS and its many advocates has moved lawmakers and administrative leaders over the decades to make language a priority in legislative action. Through the years, JNCL-NCLIS has found great political champions and their unforgettable staff members whose actions have yielded great strides to support equitable language learning opportunities and language preservation and revitalization programs. Beyond the borders of Washington, D.C., JNCL continues to be a strong partner for our advocates out in the states and municipalities, working to sustain and grow language learning, save programs in danger of being cut, support equitable teacher development, impact policies and practices for language services, and focus on global connections across education and business. In 2015, as a result of the collaboration of the Lead with Languages national campaign led by ACTFL and the nonstop work of JNCL-NCLIS advocates gaining lawmaker support, Congress commissioned a study by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences that renews and enhances the charge set forth by the Carter Commission in 1978. The AAAS Commission report entitled America's Languages, Investing in Language Education for the 21st Century calls on us to improve access to as many languages as possible for people of every age, ethnicity, and socioeconomic background. The recommendations of this landmark study, to which so many JNCL-NCLIS members and other leaders around the fields of language volunteered their time and support, is the foundation that guides JNCL-NCLIS advocacy and strengthens our coalition. JNCL-NCLIS celebrates this milestone of collective accomplishments and the continued success and growth of collaboration across all language fields. The work of JNCL-NCLIS does not stop here. This year of presidential transition is yet another great step toward achieving the mission and vision of the organization, a world where language facilitates the free movement of people, information, and ideas, builds mutual understanding and acceptance of cultural and linguistic diversity, and promotes the personal development of the individual. Raise your voice, share your story, and join JNCL-NCLIS for this next chapter of language advocacy.
So I want to thank you, Amanda and Alyssa, for the incredible video that highlights our 2020 first virtual Language Advocacy Day, or 2021 rather, Language Advocacy Days video. And that hopefully gives you an idea not just about the history of JNCL and the organization, but also the importance of the impact and the number of different programs and different students that were able to reach as a result. And so Language Advocacy Day truly is that opportunity for all of us to really connect directly to our legislators and those senators and congressmen at the national level that will make decisions that impact what happens to us in the classrooms. And so during virtual language Advocacy Days in 2023, our participants will be able to have those direct conversations with the offices of all 100 senators, because we have representation from all 50 states, or the opportunity to represent all 50 states, as well as those offices of representatives that are various JNCL Language Advocacy Days representatives and delegates will be able to share. And so we want to think about Language Advocacy Day as really that catalyst, as that opportunity to not just share what we're doing in the classrooms, but really to inspire our legislators and inform them about the importance of the language work that we do. And so Language Advocacy Day becomes your opportunity to be that citizen that voices opportunities, as well as the challenges of what's happening in the classroom and how at the federal level policies can make a difference. And so some of the things that we look at in terms of our advocacy work are listed here. We want to facilitate that free movement of people, information, and ideas across culture, across the different diverse groups that we work with as language educators. Certainly, another point that's oftentimes something that our legislators care about will be things like strengthening the economy and national security. As language teachers, we know the importance of building that understanding through the acceptance of cultural and some linguistic diversity. And most importantly, for our students, what's the impact of language education on their future opportunities? And that's a part of this 2023 Language Advocacy Day in terms of building opportunity through multilingualism. So the next slide, please. There we go. So here are 3 reasons, and really important ones, why we have chosen to once again do Language Advocacy Days as a virtual event. And it's intentional. And these are 3 of the reasons. First of all, and probably our most compelling reason, is because it's important that we get into every legislator's office to share what it is that's we're doing and why language education is so important. And when it is a virtual event, that becomes an easier possibility than to have all 50 states travel to Washington, D.C. So that's the number one and most important reason for a virtual Language Advocacy Day, is so that we can include every voice from every state. The second reason is that it's an opportunity not to waste time getting settled into an office or moving from one room to another, but really to just log into that Zoom room and have that full time frame to actually discuss the issues and policies at hand. And so we're able to meet in a very focused way with our legislators and with their staffs. And that's been, has been in the last 2 years proven to be a really powerful tool. Also, it's still a little complicated in DC. There's, with extra security and other issues that makes those face-to-face visits a little more challenging. This virtual event offers the opportunity to bypass those barriers and get directly in contact with the people who will help us make a change. And then lastly, it's a great opportunity to be an example for your classroom. As a Language Advocacy Day delegate, in the past, I have, brought students actually to DC. Well, now that it's virtual, it's easy for every teacher to do that. And we had a great example last year with Ted Zaro of Massachusetts, who actually created a field day, sort of a field trip rather, event virtually to Language Advocacy Day for his Latin students. And so 3 reasons why you want to be a part of Language Advocacy Days and why you want to share the opportunity with those that you know is certainly, first, you can connect. We connect with one another, and more importantly, we connect as all 50 states representing language education in a really unified voice. Secondly, to advocate. We need education language policy that's going to be more impactful. Right now, we have a few programs, but they're not meeting all of the need we have, whether that need is for additional funding, whether it's for the teacher pipeline. All of those are issues that we'll be able to address during our meetings on the Hill virtually. And then lastly, certainly to strengthen our own skills, learning to advocate and share the language needs and policy issues with legislators is not something you can just do that day. It's also something you can share with your administrators, you can share with parents, and opportunities that you have out in your own communities. And so we want to really provide you with the tools and the resources to be an advocate, not just in February, but all year long. Alyssa, thank you. So here's what the schedule will look like. This time frames are at the end of the school day primarily, with the exception of sometimes those meetings that you may have with your legislators on the Hill. And that's so we can, again, be inclusive of everyone that wants to be a part of it, so that you might not necessarily need a substitute to be able to participate. So I will kick off on Wednesday, February 8th, with some insights from a multilingual Capitol Hill. And this was a highlight last year where we actually heard from some of our congressional staffers who are multilingual. We'll talk about our specific legislative asks. An ask is, what we want the legislator, the congressman or the senator to do for us. What is it that, we want them to support or to introduce as a policy, or to sign on to or vote for, or whatever that might be. It's a virtual experience. So we'll talk on Wednesday about what that's like. We'll prepare you to go into those virtual offices and share language policy needs. And we'll work as a team. You'll have each of you are a part of a state and a state group that can work together, and you'll have time to kind of plan and to strategize and to discuss how your own state can be best represented in Language Advocacy Days. And finally, we'll get together with a great reception and share what we've learned and ask questions, but also just to be together as a cooperative and collaborative body. On Thursday, February 9th, that's the day you'll be meeting with your legislators, with your congressional members, as well as your senators. And again, with all 50 states represented, that means we get into all 50 offices. And that's going to be incredibly important, because that means that every senator is going to hear about our language asks. And then we're going to close that evening with our awards ceremony and recognize some individuals who've been very impactful and really been supportive of language education and who are making a difference. And then on Friday, it's our learning day. So we'll be talking about celebrating the results of our meetings on the Hill, but we'll also be talking about the opportunity through multilingualism in some specific breakout sessions that are going to help us bring those advocacy needs home. So as we think about those meetings that you've had on the Hill, we've met with every senator. If we have a legislative ask, that makes it really easy for us to get a lot of support. And so when we think about support, it's like, how does that impact what's happening at home? And those breakout sessions are going to be specifically designed for you to take what we do at the national level and take it down to your state, and to be able to better inform the administrators about what difference and what impact our legislative asks have had across the country. And then again, that advocating beyond LAD, like what is our take home? What are our next steps? So we have a great program that's put together specifically with you all in mind. And so we hope that you will not only join us, but you'll share that opportunity with others. Remember, we don't get into a legislative office, or whether it's a congressional member or a member of the Senate, unless we have a constituent. So the more of us there are, the more congressional offices that we can get into. And so that's really important that we spread the word. And finally, we have, next slide, please, some opportunities for us to share with you both some of our own experiences, but then we'll also give you an opportunity to ask. So I'm going to bring in, I don't know if we can do that with turn on our cameras, Amanda and Megan. Amanda, I introduced to you as JNCL's president soon in January 1 to become our executive director. So something we're really excited about as an organization. And Megan, who is the official delegate from the Indiana Foreign Language Teachers Association, and a good friend and great advocate. So let's start with you, Amanda. What advice would you give a first-time advocate?
Well, thank you. And I just have to take a moment and say that Linda Ignatz is our president-elect. And so as of January 1st, she will be president of this incredible organization. I am personally thrilled that we get to continue advocating and working together on this great cause. So I want to just say that my first experience as an advocate at JNCL and specifically at LAD many years ago was that of having the opportunity to work with my colleagues from my state of New Jersey to get to know the entire experience of understanding what are the legislative asks, what does that mean, how do we connect that with the exact people that we're meeting with. And so to me, that first time experience, I think, is exciting to do some research on your members of Congress, the people you'll be meeting with. The first piece is to get to know them, what their interests are as legislators, and connect that to your own experiences, especially in the state. That would be the first thing. The other thing is just this great opportunity to really feel like you can have an impact beyond the walls of your classroom, beyond the walls of your school, and potentially across our entire nation for things that I know that we all care about so much. So that would be, my advice would be to take it all in, to listen a lot the first time, and to also feel proud and able to say things as well. And that's one of the greatest things about being virtual, as well as having the opportunity to speak to different people, even if you don't feel like saying it out loud. You can chat with someone on the side. There are wonderful opportunities to feel your presence. It has all of the types of values and experiences that you wanted to have.
Thank you, Amanda. Megan, what would you share of I'm a first-time advocate. What advice do I need from you?
Well, I second Amanda's comments about listening. I came in as a first-time advocate from Indiana as the only representative from Indiana. So I didn't get to, meet with people from my state, but Linda and those from Illinois took me under their wing and really helped me figure out, okay, what am I doing here? And it was a lot of figuring out very quickly how to do this. And it was a big learning curve, but it was so rewarding in the end to be like, I just met with some senators, or I just met with people in this representative's office, and they actually listened to me. It was a very cool experience to be like, I can actually have a voice in politics beyond just my local school district.
Megan, I am so glad you shared that, because my first time experience was a situation in which I just felt like I didn't know enough. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know all the information. I was feeling a little overwhelmed. And yet what I realized, my big takeaway and aha, was that they know a lot less about what's happening at the local level in their own states, that the states they represent, than I did. I had more information because I was living my classroom experience in language. And I think we tend to assume that they know everything that's happening in the home state, and they don't. That's why we're there. That's why they want to hear directly from their constituents, because that's the opportunity they don't get on a regular basis. They're dealing with other states and national policy, and they don't really necessarily know, unless we share with them how that policy is going to positively or potentially negatively impact us. And so it really is an exciting opportunity, because they want to hear from us. They want to be informed, and we get to have that, play that role. And I think that was my biggest sort of aha, like, I don't have to know it all. I know more than they know about what's happening in language education, starting with my own classroom. So our second little question, or piece of tips or advice, is how has a virtual LAD experience exceeded your expectations? Sometimes we're hopeful that, we liked being, if those of you who've done it in the past, being in Washington, D.C. and going into the offices. But this experience virtually has been actually pretty cool. Amanda, do you want to share one of yours?
Sure. I mean, the entire experience of making this into a virtual event has been fascinating, right? We know that being in the halls of Congress is so exciting in and of itself. I also know that what LAD virtually has been able to do for us, one, of course, it gave us the opportunity to have voices from all over the nation, which we'd never had before, because people couldn't afford to get there from all 50 states and couldn't afford to leave their classrooms. And we know that that's even a bigger problem now. So one of the things that has exceeded my expectations is the ability to talk to people from all over the nation and to have that perspective coming back to us and certainly back to our legislators. The other thing that has exceeded my expectations was the level of attention that we get from those offices in a Zoom room, as opposed to being kind of sitting on a couch somewhere in the middle of someone's office squished into the corner, right? We were able, in many cases, the actual member of Congress was able to Zoom in more easily than would have been he or she would have been able to if we were in the congressional buildings and they were in the middle of other meetings. So I found that we got a lot more attention. It was more undivided attention and a lot more time in some way because of that. Even though the time frame still seemed the same, because you're not running from place to place and nobody else is running, you're speaking to someone who's paying attention to you. And so in that way, it exceeded my expectations as well. Not to mention just the way that we were able to bring different perspectives and voices into the conversation, not just from our advocates, but also as speakers, featured speakers who we were able to bring in just by virtue of the fact that they didn't have to come anywhere to do it. So we had a lot of options and opportunities. You're muted, Linda, but it actually made me think of one other thing here. Somebody in here did ask a question that I think is applicable to this. And that is about who organizes the state groups. The groups are of the states, and depending who registers to be an advocate from your state, depending on the size of that group, either you would all go together, and what I mean by go is attend the meetings virtually together, or you would be broken into two groups, and we usually have a leader for those groups that we look at who's got a lot of experience doing this to help guide that process. And we've got a lot of guidelines over the last 2 years we've developed to help make that process fun and smooth and exciting for everyone involved. Sorry, go right ahead, Megan.
No, I was, and to just sort of to back up a little bit of what Amanda shared, the more we have in terms of members, participants from your state, the better, because that means we'll get into one more congressional office if, especially if I'm going to call you, your members of your group have geographic diversity and represent a different numbers of congressional offices and districts, because that's really key. Megan, a virtual LAD experience that you thought, wow, that really went great.
Well, I think definitely kind of like what Amanda talked about being able to do it from your house and not having to find subs has made it much easier for teachers, especially after this pandemic. Finding subs for 3 days plus travel time was going to be a challenge for a lot of people. So in my state, like I said, my first language advocacy day, I was by myself. And this last year we had 4 from Indiana go. So, I mean, in 3 years, essentially, we quadrupled the number of people that could come from our state. And for new people, especially, I feel like doing it virtually takes some pressure off. Going into the offices is exciting and fun, and finding out all those little nooks and crannies that Linda pointed out to me on my first day on how to get around to DC. But it was very stressful. Of like, I'm meeting this 22-year-old in an office, crammed into a corner where I'm out of my element, having to talk to people in power. Whereas doing it virtually from my office or from my schoolroom or from my couch takes some of the pressure off, because I feel like I'm more in control of my own environment. So I feel like, especially for new people who joined me this past year, having that piece on there made it less stressful on that first time out of the gate. because we've all done Zooms, we know how it works, we know all the buttons at this point. So doing it virtually makes it more enjoyable on that first one, especially, and less kind of stressful of, am I in the right spot? Am I talking to who I need to talk to? Do I have all my papers in order? So I think that's my biggest takeaway.
No, that's great. I'm thinking about, the 18 to 20,000, steps you don't have to make. Going back and forth from one side of Capitol Hill to the other side between offices was always a challenge, especially in February when it rains.
Yes, when it rains or it's freezing or both. But, I wanted to add one thing to that, if it's okay, Linda. I wanted to just add the fact that as a result, we've also been able to do things like this. We're doing a lot of trainings. We've been doing so many trainings ahead of time. We're able to get people together virtually ahead of time, often by state, to help them get ready and feel comfortable. And we've spent a lot of time over the last few years building those trainings and building those opportunities for people to feel very comfortable going into these meetings. And so I'm so glad to hear, Megan, that you feel so comfortable doing it and that it's been a great experience for you, because that's the crux of it, is to help people feel like maybe they didn't think they could do this. Maybe they weren't sure that they could advocate in this way, but we want everyone who comes to this to feel like they know what the information is. They can take it in and understand how it relates to them and their work, and be able to share some ideas about it, in the way that is comfortable for them. So that's part of the training that is so important to us as well from JNCL's perspective.
Absolutely. So our third and final question here is, what was your most memorable congressional meeting? And memorable can mean a lot of different things. So I'm interested to hear what these stories might pertain. So Amanda, do you have a particular meeting that really stands out?
Well, it's not one of the virtual meetings, but I do need to tell this story, because this is the kind of thing that happens after you build connections with the offices for a very long time. And years ago, one of our greatest champions, Representative Rush Holt from the state of New Jersey, had been coming to speak to our entire group, the entire LAD group. And after he came to visit and speak with us, because we were the delegation from New Jersey, he took a picture with us out in the hallway. And that day, and things were very different then, right, security wise, that day he was able to say to us that he wanted to take us with him into the Capitol, and he wanted us to go with him on the underground subway and go up and watch the president of Mexico speak in Spanish and address the entire Congress, and he wanted to take us with him. And so he did. And he literally stood outside of the rotunda and scalped tickets to be able to bring us in with him. And then we got to go inside, and I met my actual idol. I met Madeleine Albright that day. She was sitting 2 rows away from us. And so it was an incredible experience. And it had everything to do with the fact that over the last several years before that, we had built such a strong relationship with Representative Holt's office that we knew the people who worked for him. He knew how dedicated we were as a state and as advocates, and he wanted us to be a part of that. And his leadership really had national impact. That's why, we have an award named for him at JNCL-NCLIS. So that to me is one of the greatest stories, and is also one of the reasons why I know that the ongoing development of these relationships is so important.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that would be a pretty tough memory to be. That was great. Thank you for sharing. Megan, you've done this a few times now. What story might you have to share?
Well, I can't top that one, but
this is not a competition, but I mean, come on, how do you not tell that story, right? It's such a good story.
No, but I kind of went in to JNCL and LAD almost ready for a fight. I'm from Indiana. I'm from a very Republican, you speak English only state. And I was pleasantly surprised that I did not have anybody fight with me on it. They were very interested in it. I had to change my perspective, like Linda talked about earlier, and put it more in economic terms than the cultural terms that I tend to think of languages in. But it was really cool. I think it was last year or 2 years ago now. My years are getting confused. When we met with one of our senators, and he actually signed on to the caucus, the American Language Caucus. And I thought, that is amazing that somebody from my state, who's very anti-education, very much doesn't want to do anything, or in my perspective, thought that languages were not important, would then sign on because we talked about it in our meetings and we kept following up. He kept, for a couple of weeks, his office would email us and be like, okay, so no, what is this? Explain this again. And then he signed on and we were like, wow, we're one of the first Republican senators to sign on to this caucus. Like, how does that happen? And it was because we were there. He had no idea about it. And if we had not been there promoting it, I'm sure it would not have been a blip on his radar. So just that piece was amazing.
Yeah, and I think we want to remember that when we go into these, it feels maybe intimidating, especially if you feel like the member of, whether it's your senator or your congressman or woman are there, that feels a little bit on the intimidating side. But we're often meeting with their staffers. Potentially, we also get to meet with the member as well. But what I have probably walked away with most frequently is that sort of sense of we do share some commonalities. And I think that's always really important, because for legislation and policy to take place, we need support from both sides of the aisle. And I know that a lot of times the congressional, we start with, well, do you speak another language? Have you studied another language? And the stories we've heard, not just, those are my memorable experiences, not just from the staffers, but even from some of one of my senators shared how he was pickpocketed, on a trip and wished he'd had more French to be able to respond and say, stop. So you don't, we have these opportunities to know them as people, and as Amanda shared, create those relationships that are going to actually make a difference in the future. So I'm really excited for you all to have some of your own memorable experiences, and hopefully we'll be hearing from some of you in the future as to what your takeaways were and what you've learned. So I think we have another slide that asks for your questions. So if you have any questions about things that we haven't made clear or you're curious about, please just add them to the chat. You can send them directly to President Amanda Seawald in the chat, and she's going to kind of feed us the questions so that everyone can hear the question as well as the response.
And in the meantime, as we're waiting for these questions, Linda, if it's okay, I'll just share a little bit about kind of thinking about this year and thinking about the way things are changing. And you'll hear that, in January, we'll have an event that will really help get everyone ready for LAD, where we'll talk a little bit more about those asks as they come into focus. And what I mean by that is that each year at this time, we're working really hard, especially with our Director of Government Relations, John Bernstein, to look at what's going to happen congressionally, what the makeup of the committees will be, how that impacts the legislation that we've been working on and continue to work on, and how that impacts the growth of new legislation, which is going to be a cornerstone of our work this year, is a new piece of legislation that we'll be introducing. So this is really a time for us right now, where internally what we're doing at JNCL is we're listening to everyone. We're thinking about how things will change with the new Congress, what that is going to mean. And as Linda shared before, and as Megan shared, that having bipartisan support for all of our issues with regard to language education is essential. And we also know it's a bipartisan issue, right? Because of the concepts of economy and national security, and also looking at making sure that we have everything that we need for learners across the board and supporting cultures and identities. These are the ways that, and of course, equity specifically. This is the type of question that we're asking ourselves right now as we look at the legislation, we think about what's happening. And you've probably heard something about the omnibus piece and all of the different, continuing resolutions. All of that plays into what we decide to do, as we move forward for LAD. So, so let's say I have a question here. Is what if I don't feel confident in my understanding of the legislation when I talk to members of Congress? Do either of you want to respond to that? Maybe share about some of the resources and the things that we have, or maybe our great platform.
Megan, what do you think? You and I have both been there. Like, I don't know all of this.
Yeah. I feel like now, because there is so much on the website that will give you information on the different pieces, it is a little bit easier than it was previously. But ideally, unless you're a state of one, you'll have somebody there that will help you on that first day. Even, like I said, I was a state of one and Illinois took me under their wings. So there will be people around that will help you figure out all the different asks. But really focusing, if you don't know what asks to really focus in on, focusing on how language is important in your region is almost as important as the other piece, I would say. When we talked about the dual language schools in Indiana and pointing out that we have a dual language school in their district, then they're like, oh, okay, so this is actually going to help my people locally. Or the seals of biliteracy, that how many people come from your state. So coming with that sort of information from your local state is as important, in my opinion, as knowing the legislative pieces.
No, I agree with you, Megan. And that dual language program, I just have to do a shout out for Lawrence Township. My grandchildren go to that program. So I'm really thrilled with that. So Indiana's doing good work in that regard. And I appreciate, thank you. I think that piece is also, it's really helpful to know that you're not the only source of information. So yes, you do have another individual or more that might be in your team, but our legislators in advance of the meetings are receiving the highlights of the asks as well. They're getting them in a print form. So if you leave something out, it's okay. And I think what Megan shared is to bring it home, because that's who they represent. And if you have, you have a story to tell, if you have the opportunity to include your students as Ted did last year as a virtual field trip to Washington, D.C., then having brought students in the past, they're really excited to hear from the people that legislation will most impact. So we'll provide you with lots of training on the JNCL side. Our legislators will get advanced information, their staffers, about the programs we're going to ask about. JNCL will do the follow-up as well. So there's no need to fear that if you've left something out, it's not a problem. We have your back and we're going to take care of that for you. But we just need your participation because you are our ticket into their office.
Absolutely. Yes.
And I would point out as well, they may have questions for you that you don't know an answer to.
And that's okay.
And just say, I don't know that answer right off the top of my head, and I will get back to you. And just follow up with them once you contact your Department of Education or get that statistic or whatever they're looking for.
And we love it if they do that, right? Because then that builds that relationship that we're trying to build, right? Then you have those touch points, those connection points beyond that one meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I was just going to say one other thing, Linda, that it made me think of when Megan was talking about the program in Indiana, the dual language program. One of the things that came out of LAD for me one year, especially every year, is because we get to hear from the different states and get to hear from different people and what's going on in their states in addition to what's going on nationally. And I learned a lot about the Indiana dual language grants program as a result of, and I actually spent time writing legislation in New Jersey that mirrored it so that we could try and get that kind of legislation passed in New Jersey. So New Jersey learned from Indiana on that one. So it's, there's so much to be taken from this. And, I appreciate you mentioning the website. I encourage everyone to look at our advocacy page, which has been updated, and it's really got some great information set up so clearly. And the one other thing, as Linda was saying, all the information is there for you. And also, we're going to follow it up and we're going to make sure that people have the information. But one of the greatest tools that we have, and we were able to have this past year, and we'll have again this year, is through our partners, Advocacy Associates, who provide us with this interactive point-by-point information on your screen during your meetings so that you have it right in front of you. You don't have to go looking for it. You don't have to open a different tab. It's right there with you the entire time. And it makes it a lot easier to even think about how you approach these meetings.
And another advantage to going virtual.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a great reminder, because those programs, the way they've set it up, It's really great. Yeah. So it makes it very simple and easy to participate. So I think this was our last slide. Is there one more with our resources?
I think there is one more slide.
Here we
Oh,
are.
this is the important one.
Yes, this is the best piece. So if you haven't yet registered, we have some good news for you. We have a discount code that will give you the same pricing as those who registered with our sort of early promotion, early bird sort of rate. So you just use this discount code INFOSession23. You need to do it in the next 24 hours. There's like, a timeline here, but go to languagepolicy.org. You'll find the, right on the homepage, as well as under events, the information for Language Advocacy Days. The info question is, email is also here if you have further questions or need some assistance. But we are so excited and hopeful that you will not only participate, but that you'll spread the word and get us into more offices for this incredible week in February. So thank you all for being here. Do you have any final comments, Megan, Amanda? Are there any final questions maybe that popped into the chat box?
I'm looking really quickly. I don't see anything that came up. All I can say is thank you so much, Linda, for leading this awesome session and for your leadership. And I'm looking forward to continuing that. And also just that, LAD is an incredible experience and it helps you get involved with this JNCL community. And that's what JNCL-NCLIS is. JNCL-NCLIS is a community, a national community of advocates who care about the things that you care about. And looking at language education and looking at multilingualism across this nation and helping to build it. So we hope to see you all there.